Boom! Ha ha ha! Hey, I'm Thundercloud. Mum calls me James, washing away the garbage, leaving rainbows after rains. It's Chillin Tuesday on this 8th of October 2024. What more could we ask for? I don't know. Not really sure. But hey, well, look who's behind me. Edward Philip Harrington. Yes, the Diggers poet, born in 1895 and passed on in 1966. Yes, he was one of our poets who actually served in World War One. Now I'll be reading out some of his poetry today, his bush poetry and the like. And but as well as that, I'll be reading a couple of newspaper articles about Edward Harrington, or Ted as he was known. So let's begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I broadcast, the band by people, and also acknowledge the work of our service men and women who served in our wars to protect and create this wonderful way of life that we have today, lest we forget. All right, what have we got coming up here at the Australian Poetry Hall of Fame? Well, we have in the middle of November the Poets on the Mountain Festival, the 14th, 15th, 16th and 17th of November, the 15th of November. Wow, there's workshops and all kinds of stuff happening here, as well as the Australian Poetry Film Contest, which is still open for late entries up until November. So if you have got a poem that you would like to put into film, put it on your camera or whatever and submit it to the Australian Poetry Film Contest for the Australian Poetry Film Festival here at the Poets on the Mountain Festival in November. All right, as part of the Poets on the Mountain Festival, we are also fishing for funny poets, and we have the comedy poetry written competition and performance competition. That is on the same weekend, so you can check that out on the website australianpoetryhalloffame.com.au under events or the downloads tab if you're interested in entering. All right, let's get the show on the road with a little bit of Edward Harrington. I might start out of this book here. This is Poets of Australia, selected by Geaorge, Mackaness, and there's only one Ted Harrington poem in here, but all the same, I'm still going to do it. And this is The Old Blade Shed. It was a calm, clear eve in the late November, and the hills were flushed with the sunset red when I reined my horse in the clump of timber to gaze again in the old blade shed. A hush of sorrow, an air of mourning brooded over the quiet scene, but a plover uttered a cry of warning, and an ibis rose from the reed beds green. For 30 years had the sunsets mellowed on its roof of tin and its walls of wood. The rains had beaten and the winds had bellowed, but strong and sturdy the old shed stood. The bush around it had changed to meadows, and the wheat waved high where the sheep had fed, but the gums still whispered and threw their shadows night and morn on the old blade shed. There is always something of sadness after, in viewing the scenes of our early years, the spot that rang to our childish laughter, or saw the fall of our foolish tears. I gazed again on the well-known places, and memory gathered each broken thread, and I heard the voices and saw the faces of the men who shore in the old blade shed. And my mind went back to the years departed, to the warm spring days when the pens were full, when the bell was rung and the shearers started, and their blades bit deep in the soft white wool. And again I fancy I saw them bending with beaded brows while their breaths came deep, and I heard the click of the shear blades blending with a yell for tar and the bleat of sheep. I was only a lad, but I loved to linger and watch and listen, all eyes and ears. From the rouseabout to the bearded ringer, I knew them all in those far-off years. And they told me tales of the runs far distant, of the sprees they had and the lives they led. And my heart beat fast as I sat and listened years ago in the old blade shed. Now gone forever the old-time glories, the bleat of sheep and the click of shears hushed and ended the wondrous stories that rang so sweet in my boyish ears. I always wanted to be a rover, the sky my roof and the earth my bed, but long ere the days of my youth were over, I bade goodbye to the old blade shed. The evening shadows were falling round me when I sighed and woke from my dream at last. For broken now were the bonds that bound me to this quiet scene in the years long past. The friends of my boyhood were gone forever, and the dreams that gladdened my youth were dead. And I turned my horse with a sudden shiver and rode away from the old blade shed. Yeah, a bit of melancholy reminiscing there by Edward Harrington. It's a lovely piece of poetry, as is most of the stuff that I've selected tonight. And I couldn't really find a great deal, but I did because I've got the Australian Poetry Library and Archive. And I found, well, I've got these 3 books here that have got stuff in, and there's a couple more over there which has got repetitions of what's in here, plus what I've been able to find online tonight. One of the things that I did find online from the website Trove, where they have all the old newspapers and stuff, there's this article from, is it the Glen Innes Examiner in 1940, and it was July the 23rd, 1940. Edward Harrington, Australia's poet in Palestine. In the music shop, all other guests faded at the sight of 2 songs whose titles, The Bushrangers and Lassiter's Last Long Ride, reclaimed their nationality, further proved by the fact that Peter Dawson had composed the music and Edward Harrington had written the stirring words, writes MB in the Melbourne Age. To many people, Edward Harrington is one of Australia's best ballad writers, but to others he's our poet of Palestine, more so now when our thoughts are with the AIF in that land. So remember this was written in 1940 during World War II. The new army is marching over the same routes the first AIF took, living experiences in many ways similar to those sung by this soldier ballad writer. Serving with the Light Horse in Palestine during the last war, his experiences there naturally have greatly influenced much of his verse. Many of the poems in his book, Boundary Bend and Other Ballads, are the direct result of these experiences. The keynote of most of his work is quiet strength gained through simplicity, tolerance, sympathy, and compassion are in all he writes. We glimpse the wounds, the hurt, the pride, the ache of disillusionment, but never do we find sentiments that do not arise from a broad, humane outlook. In his Song of Sinai, where we rode to the jingle of the spurs and belted over the Sinai, there is realism strong in its restraint and the poet's ability to make the reader see what he cannot forget. He's written in Anzac a short but very fine tribute to that famous name for which will for all time mean so much to us. The title explains retrospect, in which we are recalled the days of movement, life and zest, when baleful beacons glowed and splendid legions massed abreast down duty's open road. I wonder if when he wrote, the sun will rise and the sun will set on minaret, mosque and tomb, but the desert children will not forget the men of the emu plume, he ever dreamed that so soon. would Australians be seen in the East? Many phases of campaign existence are touched on with the understanding sympathy of one who is both poet and Celt. In a few clear-cut sentences, we are made to see and feel the scene and action which a ballad recalls. By the Wadi Imelago, we were lying in reserve in a spot not far from Gaza, where the Wadi takes a curve, and we swung in line to follow up the winding Roman road, and we and the poet meditating on quite another side of a soldier's life in the Agic. If Morgan knew, the Australian's nostalgia is evident when on outpost, his thoughts turn to home and the bush as the lines show a saddened hope for a future peace. In The Mother Speaks, he writes not directly of Palestine, but on typical of thousands whose heart lies there, as well as pathos, glory and valour. The humour of the soldier is ever present. It is almost hilarious in part of the brothers O'Brien, of whom it is written, they were always beginning or ending a fight. Oh, the brothers O'Brien were Irish, all right. The work of Edward Harrington merits appreciation, though he writes today of many things other than a past campaign. His is the spirit that has always been a poet's. Interesting bit of writing there about Edward Harrington. Now, I've got the Pacific Book of Bush Ballads here, and this has got Morgan in it and the Bushrangers, and this is nothing to do with World War One. It's to do with Bushrangers. Yeah. So Morgan by Edward Harrington. When Morgan crossed the Murray to Peachelbar and Doom, a sombre, silent shadow rode with him through the gloom. The wild things of the forest slunk from the outlaw's track. The boobook croaked a warning, go back, go back, go back. It woke no answering echo in Morgan's blackened soul, as onward through the darkness he rode towards his goal. An evil man was Morgan, a price was on his head. The simple bush folk whispered his name with very dread. Before the fierce Dan Morgan, the bravest man might quake. A cold and callous killer, he killed for killing's sake. Past swamp and creek and gully, and settler's lone abode, towards the station homestead, the grim Dan Morgan rode. And still that hooded horseman that Morgan could not see, watched by the wild bush creatures, rode close beside his knee. Before them, in a clearing, a drover's campfire burned. The phantom rode with Morgan, and turned when Morgan turned, and loud the boobook's warning came on the cold night air. Go back, Dan Morgan, beware, beware, beware. He reached the station homestead, into the hall he strode, and on his evil features the flickering lamp light glowed. Into one room he thundered, bring me a glass of grog. If any disobey me, I'll shoot him like a dog. With pistols cocked and ready, dark-eyed and beetle-browed, before the famous outlaw, the bravest hearts were cowed. All night with loaded pistols he dozed and muttered there. All night the evil shadows stood close beside his chair. The brave Scotch girl MacDonald, alas, who knew no fear, slipped out unseen by Morgan to warn the homesteads near. And in the hours of darkness, before the break of dawn, Around the fierce Dan Morgan, the fatal net was drawn. Day broke upon the Murray, the morning mists were gone. The magpies sung their matins, the river murmured on. When Morgan left the homestead and neared the stockyard gate, he heard the boobook's warning and turned, but turned too late. For Quinlan pressed the trigger as Morgan swung around and sent the grim bushranger blaspheming to the ground. So fell the dread Dan Morgan in 1865, in death as much unpitied as hated when alive. He lived by blood and plunder, an outlaw to the end. In life he showed no mercy, in death he left no friend. And all who seek to follow in Morgan's evil track should heed the boobook's warning. Go back, go back, go back. Well, nice little poem, a bit of tragedy happening there at the end, hey? All right, the next one we got, well, this is about the Kelly gang. Well, it's about all bushrangers, actually. Well, maybe. Kelly gang, yeah. It's called The Bushrangers by Edward Harrington. 4 horsemen rode out from the heart of the range, 4 horsemen with aspects forbidding and strange. They were booted and spurred, they were armed to the teeth, and they frowned as they looked on the valley beneath. As forward they rode through the rocks and the fern, Ned Kelly, Dan Kelly, Steve Hart, and Joe Byrne. Ned Kelly drew rein and he shaded his eyes. The town's at our mercy, see yonder it lies. To hell with the troopers, he shook his clenched fist. We will shoot 'em like dogs if they dare to resist. And all of them nodded, grim-visaged and stern. Ned Kelly, Dan Kelly, Steve Hart, and Joe Byrne. Through the gullies and creeks they rode silently down. They stuck up the station and raided the town. They opened the safe and they looted the bank. They laughed and were merry, they ate and they drank. Then off to the ranges they went with their gold. Oh, never were bandits more reckless and bold. But time brings its punishment. Time travels fast, and the outlaws were trapped in Glenrowan at last, where 3 of them died in the smoke and the flame, and Ned Kelly came back to the last. He was game. But the law shot him down, he was fated to hang, and that was the end of the bush ranging gang. Whatever their faults and whatever their crimes, their deeds lend romance to those faraway times. They've gone from the gullies they haunted of old, and nobody knows where they buried their gold. To the ranges they love they will never return. Ned Kelly, Dan Kelly, Steve Hart, and Joe Byrne. But at times when I pass through the sleepy old town, where far distant peaks of Strathbogie look down, I think of the days when those grim ranges rang to the galloping hooves of the bushranging gang. Though the years bring oblivion, time brings a change. The ghosts of the Kellys still ride from the range. Yeah, wow. Cool. All about the Kelly gang. All right, let's read this next article from, this one was from The Age in 1952, the 26th of April, which is the day after Anzac Day. And this was, and it was before Edward Harrington passed on in 1966. A Digger Poet, work of Edward Harrington. Australia has her poets of war no less than older lands, and not the least of these is the Victorian Edward Harrington, Not that his poems deal exclusively with war. As a digger of the First World War, his experiences naturally moved him to decry its horror and waste, while appreciating the glory of individual sacrifice and heroism. In his collection of poems, Boundary Bend and Other Ballads, now almost impossible to procure, he writes of many phases of life as a member of the 4th Light Horse serving in Palestine. In the main, he prefers the ballad form because of this and his tolerant and compassionate outlook. He's regarded by some as wearing Lawson's mantle. Edward Harrington was born at Shepperton and attended Warnolta State School. This was the school that Joseph Furphy made famous as the schoolhouse on the plain. At the age of 12, Harrington had written quite a number of verses for his own artistic outlet. It was a natural that the bush and its creatures should have a strong appeal. In one of these juvenile verses, he says of a skylark, and sweetly, high and clearly loud, through the hushed air it rang, and in it seemed as if each cloud had taken a voice and sang. Love of the land, Edward Harrington is a great son of Australia, loving and knowing her cities and her bush. He shows us the waving crops and shearing sheds and finds humour and pathos in barrooms and crowded markets alike. Many of his poems show his love of the land. There is a suggestion of Padraic columns in his little bit of land, which finishes as such. And I've got my future planned, for at last I am the owner of a little bit of land. And again in the Ploughman he boasts, when the sunset reddens, I drop the reins, pat my horses and drop their chains. And they go for a roll in the rich red loam and quicken their steps, and they turn for home, and I follow them behind them with heart content. For a task well done and my day well spent, with the cool wind blowing upon my brow. Oh, I love my horses and I love my plough. Many subjects are treated by his pen, nature, of course, and even satire. The Kerrigan Boys is the title poem of a second collection of Harrington's poems. His verses, set to music, form another group. Many of his songs have been sung by famous singers, such as Peter Dawson. But as a digger poet, he is at his strongest. He wrote of Sinai and Palestine, as he wrote of the stockyards, with knowledge and understanding. He knows the sorrows of those left behind. In Lone Pine, he mourns the dead, with no bugle call can wake them from their slumber. In another poem, simply called Memories, the sun will rise and the sun will set on minaret, mosque and tomb. But the children of the desert will not forget the men of the emu plume. One sacrifice, and in the dead come home, he makes a scathing indictment, which we should all heed. He says, we deemed from our sacrifice brighter world would rise, purged of the lust of greed and pain, a world more just and wise, that peace would reign forevermore between the warring powers, and happiness would smile again on this fair land of ours, till all your pledges to the dead are honoured and fulfilled. You are traitors to the faith we held, whatever shrines you build. He continues to write this, digger poet of ours, and though, like many 1914 diggers, he spent much time in hospital, his poems continued to appear. He had written of Caesar, Shylock and Chauvel, but never more sincerely or feeling than he does the average digger, for he is our digger poet. Edward Harrington. All right, now I'm on to the Book of Australian Popular and Rhymed Verse. And yeah, there's, I think, nearly 5 in here that I've got to get through of Edward Harrington. And the first one here is actually, it's a tribute to Banjo Patterson. Don't tell me that the banjo's dead. Oh yes, I've heard the tale. But Banjo isn't dead at all. He's caught the Western mail. He has a lot of friends, you know, among the Western men. He wants to look into their eyes and clasp their hands again. He longs to spend some quiet nights beneath the western stars and hear the evening wind again among the green Ballads. So if they tell you Banjo's dead, just say that it's a lie. He comes from where they breed him tough, and Banjo will not die. They say that Clancy sent him word he's at the overflow, with many more old mates of his who knew him long ago. The man from Snowy River there, from Kosciuszko's side, who brought the wild mob in alone and taught them how to ride. He got his mountain pony too, as tough and wiry yet, and when he chased the Brumby mob and colt from Old Regret, another chap, now what's his name? He comes from Ironbark. He thought the barber cut his throat and didn't like the lark. All these old mates of his are there with others on their way. And when he got the call from them, well, how could Banjo stay? There's Gundagai and Salt Bush Bill, a rough and rugged pair. I bet there will be some fun when Banjo meets them there. Old Trooper Scott is coming too, to represent the force, and Andy Reagan, or his ghost, on Father Riley's horse. They're making for the overflow, and when they all arrive, you'll see that Banjo isn't dead. He's very much alive. Then glasses clink and healths are drunk, and many a tale is told of roving days and droving days that never will grow old. The seasons come, the seasons go, and little here abides, but good old Banjo will not die as long as Clancy rides. As long as bushmen love a horse or wild black swans go by, as long as there's a Southern Cross, the Banjo will not die. So send the joyous news abroad through hut and shearing shed, and tell the bushmen not to grieve, for Banjo is not dead. Yeah. Okay. All right. The next one we just called. This is a bit of a song actually. It's called "Cats on the Roof" by Ted Harrington. The street where I board is a forest of flats, and it's cursed by a plague of most insolent cats. As soon as the sun has slunk down in the west, they all sally forth on an amorous quest. A tomcat will call from the top of a roof, a second will answer from somewhere aloof. Then others arrive and the concert begins as they slither and slide on the tiles and tins. Cats on the roof, amorous, clamorous, cats on the roof. White ones and yellow ones, black as Othello ones. Oh, the devil's in league with the cats on the roof. They talk of the need for our country's defence, but it wouldn't involve a great deal of expense to put on the market some new sort of bombs to hurl at the tabs and the turbulent toms, who gather in numbers that nightly increase to shatter our slumber and slaughter our peace. An inventor will surely make plenty of oof. Who can deal with the menace of the cats on the roof? They climb and they clamber, they hiss and they wail. They go up and down on a musical scale. A shy young soprano will start on a note while the ardent old tenor is clearing his throat. Then off they will go in a dainty duet, and the bass will come in when the tempo is set. And any young student of sharps and of flats can learn quite a lot from a chorus of cats. Then all of a sudden the tempo will change. They really possess a most wonderful range. from alto, contralto, falsetto and bass. Caruso and Melba are not in the race. And the tenor will rise on a note of his own, and the bass will die off to a horrible moan. Oh, I doubt if the patience of Job would be proof against amorous, clamorous cats on the roof. A lull may occur when the midnight is past, and you think you are set for some slumber at last. But just as you're dozing your face to the wall, the concert will end in a general brawl, and you'll turn on your pillow and mentally vow to kill every cat that you meet with from now, till morning comes in with the dusting of mats and another night's rest has been ruined by cats. Cats on the roof, cats on the roof, amorous, clamorous cats on the roof, white ones and yellow ones, black are the fellow ones. Oh, the devil's in league with the cats on the roof. I don't know, they must be annoying. We don't have that. I hope we don't have a cat problem like that anymore. Goodness gracious me. I think we got a possum problem in Brisbane, I believe. Next one, Casey's beer. It happened many years ago in Dan McGee's hotel. A crowd was gathered round the bar. I knew the fellows well. McGee had something up his sleeve. He had the sergeant's ear. The sergeant liked a pot himself and swore by Danny's beer. Tim Casey dropped along one night, a thirsty soul was Tim, and Dan McGee took down a pot and filled it to the brim. A pot of lovely bitter ale, foam-capped and amber clear. Tim paced it gently on the bar, for Casey loved his beer. His cherry wood was in his hand. Its bowl was like a jug. He had a look around the bar and borrowed someone's plug. It was a habit Casey had, the weed was far too dear. He couldn't waste his cash on that. He wanted it for beer. What happened next I can't explain. I really hate to tell. The like was never seen before in Dan McGee's hotel. It might have been an accident, a stranger standing near. A chimpanzee in human form knocked over Casey's beer. The pot plonked down upon the floor. It sounded like a knell, and on the crowd around the bar an awful silence fell. A swagman in the corner swooned. The stranger shook with fear, but never stayed to pay the price for spilling Casey's beer. The ale went trickling down the bar and Casey stood like stone, till somewhere from his chest there came a dreadful muffled moan. The sound that came from Casey's throat I never hoped to hear. It shook the bottles on the shelf. He spilt me pint of beer. The look of pain on Casey's face, it pierced us through the core. As with a last despairing moan, he sank upon the floor. We stopped to hear his last faint words. We knew the end was near. He closed one eye and gave a sigh. He spilt me pint of beer. The graveyard lies across the road, a stone throw from the pub, and poor Tim Casey lies asleep beneath a big green shrub. And on the stone above his head you'll read in letters clear, here lies Tim Casey, rest in peace. A stranger spilled his beer. Oh, the next one, I really like this one. It's called There's Only Two of Us Here. I camped one night in an empty hut on the side of a lonely hill. I didn't go much on empty huts, but the night was awful chill. So I bawled me billy and had me tea, and seen that the door was shut. Then I went to bed in an empty bunk by the side of the old slab hut. It must have been about 12 o'clock. I was feeling cosy and warm when at the foot of me bunk I sees a horrible ghostly form. It seemed in shape to be half an ape with a head like a chimpanzee. But what the hell was it doing there? And what did it want with me? You may say, if you please, that I had DTs, or call me a crimson liar, but I wish you had seen it as plain as me, with its eyes like coals of fire. Then it gave a moan and a horrible groan that curdled me blood with fear. And there's only the two of us here, it says. There's only the two of us here. I kept one eye on the old hut door and one on the awful brute. I only wanted to dress myself and get to the door and scoot, but I couldn't find where I'd left me boots, so I hadn't a chance to clear. And there's only the two of us here, it moans. There's only the two of us here. I hadn't a thing to defend myself, not even a stick or a stone. And there's only the two of us here, it says, again with a horrible groan. I thought I'd better make some reply, though I reckon me end was near. By the holy smoke, when I find me boots, there'll be only one of us here. I gets me hands on me number 10s, and out through the door I scoots, and I lit the whole of the ridges up with the sparks from me blucher boots. So I've never slept in a hut since then, and I tremble and shake with fear when I think of the horrible form what moaned. There's only the two of us here. Okay. All right. The next one I've got from Ted Harrington is called A Gentle Hint. The old man sat upon his swag. His eyes were red and bleared. I doubt he'd had a wash for days or even combed his beard. He caged my pouch and filled his pipe and calmly blew a cloud. Some blokes ain't got no pride, he said, but I was always proud. Some time ago I humped me swag along the Lachlan side. A blazing drought had hit the land and all the stock had died. One night, a good bit after dark, I reached a country town, pulls up outside the local hall and flings me bluey down. A dance was going on inside, a crowd was on the floor, so I hitches up me pants a bit and mooches in the door. Some tarts was taken round the grub, I thinks I'm just in time. A cup of tea will do me good, them sandwiches look prime. But all at once I heard the sherang, a great big hulking brute, strides across the floor at me and landed me a beaut. He'd never said what made him narked or what he'd done it for. He simply hits me good and hard and knocks me out the door. I landed fair upon me back, I got a nasty jar. I thought just how he weren't polite. I wondered who he are. I thought perhaps he meant no harm, so I hitches up me pants and makes me mind up. Come what would, I'd take another chance. I mooches in the door again. They're carting round the sweets, cream puff and buns and rainbow cakes and other fancy eats. I'm reaching out me dook when, strike me blue and blind, one fella grabs me in the front, another from behind. They swings me like a bag of chaff and shouted, 1, 2, 3, and then they laughs and hollers, go, and it was go for me. I hurtled out into the night and lands upon a stump. Just put your hand behind me ear. You can still feel the lump. That settled me. My oath it did. They'd hurt me in me pride, and I decided there and then I wouldn't go inside. I knew I wasn't welcome there. I saw it clear as print. Some blokes ain't got no pride at all. But I can take a hint. Yeah, well, took two hints. All right, now the last two I've got for you, the Kerrigan Boys and the Swagless Swaggie by Ted Harrington. The Kerrigan Boys. By Jove, it's hot on the track today. My flannel is soaked in sweat. I think I'll sit in the shade a bit and wait for the sun to set. I know of a decent camping place by the river beyond the town, and I'd rather carry me swag through there after the sun goes down. A touch of pride. Well, perhaps it is, though I haven't much cause for pride. It's 16 years to a day almost since old man Kerrigan died. 16 years and his place is sold, and the fortune he left us spent. For the road downhill is an easy road, and that was the way we went. Kerrigan, that was our father's name, was one of the tough old sort, and he held by graft as he held by God, and he hated drink and sport. We lads were fond of a bit of fun, though he kept us under the rain, and we had to bow to the old man's will, though it went against our grain. He was kind enough in his hard old way, but we had to earn our keep, driving horses and milking cows, branding and shearing sheep. No wonder we bucked a bit at times, for you know what youngsters are. We mustn't dance at the local hall or drink in Mulligan's bar. Well, those were the orders the old man gave, but we did it just the same. Jack was 2 years younger than I, so I was the more to blame. But I've often thought, had he been less hard and left us a bit more free, it might have been better for him perhaps, and better for Jack and me. The old man dropped in the yard one day where we had the weaners penned. We picked him up and we carried him home, but we knew that it was the end. The neighbours gathered from miles around. He hadn't a single foe, and the crowd that stood by the open grave spoke well of the man below. We grieved a lot for the old man's death, though it left us wealthy men. If we had not known what he meant to us, we realised it then. Our only sister had died at birth, and our mother was long since dead, and we found that we were the only heirs when the old man's will was read. We were just a couple of country lads. We'd never been off the farm. We'd been held in check from our boyhood up by the weight of our old man's arm. Good in the saddle and fair with our fists, with a touch of the old man's pride. But the neighbours muttered and shook their heads when old man Kerrigan died. Hard and all as the old man was, for years he'd kept a stud. For love of the horse, for the horse's sake, is strong in the Irish blood. But breeding was only a hobby with him, a sort of harmless craze, though I'd often thought that he had his fling way back in his younger days. We got mixed up with a racing crowd and started to go the pace. Forgot the sound of the old man's voice and the frown on his rugged face. For the road downhill is an easy road, though it ends in a swift descent. We were only youngsters, a reckless pair, and that was the way we went. We staked for a win on the Chester colt on the strength of a trial he showed, but somebody got on the boy on top. We knew by the race he rode. He lost 10 lengths and he finished last. It was useless to make a fuss, for the men we met in the racing game were far too cunning for us. We backed him again in the Greytown Cup and he won by half the straight, but we left our cash in the bookies' bags, for he failed to draw the weight. We cursed the jockey and we cursed the horse and we sold him there and then. We had enough of the racing game and the ways of racing men. We could have got out of our troubles still if we had put our hands to the plough, but the life of leisure and cards and drink had got the grip of us now. You may call it flashness or call it pride or simply a want of sense. But the publicans and auctioneers grew wealthy at our expense. We sat and drank in Mulligan's pub and gambled the whole night long. We dealt in cattle and dealt in sheep, and most of our deals went wrong. As long as the banks would cash our cheques, we didn't care what we spent, for the road downhill is an easy road, and that was the way we went. Then things got bad and a drought came on, and it lasted over a year. Our stock died off and our dams gave out, and we knew that the end was near. Our credit stopped and the bank foreclosed, and our father's place was sold. For the road downhill is an easy road, as the prodigal found of old. 5 years after the old man's death, together we took the track. I wandered into the nearest pub and I had a drink with Jack. Then he shook my hand and he wished me luck. I knew he was close to tears, and I've never set eyes on Jack since then or heard of him now for years. Somewhere out to the west of Burke, he's humping his swag maybe, tramping along in the broiling sun and cursing himself and me. I'd give 2 years of my worthless life, though it may not last that long, for one more look at his honest face, one grip of his fingers strong. Well, that's the tale of the Kerrigan boys, and the moral is near the end. You'll always have plenty of friend at hand as long as you've cash to spend. We've had our chance and we played the fool. It's too late now to repent, for the road downhill is an easy road, and that was the way we went. Yeah. Well, isn't that sort of like quite a common thing, you know, the person in the family that builds the wealth and then passes it on to his heirs, and they spend it, and usually by 2 generations all the money's gone. Funny that. Yeah, easy come, easy go, I suppose. If you get it, if it's hard to get, then you treasure it more. All right, this one's called the Swagless Swaggie. I've got some battery there, so that's good. The Swagless Swaggie. This happened many years ago, before the bush was cleared, when every man was 6 foot high and wore a flowing beard. One very hot and windy day along the old coach road, towards Joe Murphy's halfway house, a bearded bushman strode. He was a huge and heavy man, well over 6 foot high. An old slouch hat was on his head, and murder in his eye. No billy can was in his hand, no heavy swag he bore, but deep and awful were the oaths that Swagless Swaggie swore. At last he reached the shanty door, into the bar he burst. He dumped his hat upon the floor, and cursed and cursed and cursed. A neighbouring shed had just cut out. The bar was nearly full of shearers and of bullockies who'd come to cart the wool. They were a rough and ready lot, the bushmen gathered there, But every man was stricken dumb to hear the stranger swear. He cursed the bush, he cursed mankind, the whole wide universe. It froze their very blood to hear that Swagless Swaggie curse. Joe Murphy seized an empty pot and filled it brimming full. The stranger raised it to his lips and took a mighty pull. This seemed to cool him down a bit. He finished off the ale, and to the crowd around the bar he told his awful tale. I met the Ben Hall gang, he said. The blankets stuck me up. They pinched me billy, pinched me swag, and pinched me flamin' pup. They turned me pockets inside out and took me only quid. I never thought they'd pinch me pipe, but swelt me, Gord, they did. I spoke to 'em as man to man. I said I'd fight 'em all. I would have broke O'Mealy's neck and tanned the hide of Hall. They only laughed and said goodbye and rode away to brag of how they stuck a Swaggie up and robbed him of his swag. I'd never done 'em any harm. I thought 'em decent chaps. But now I wouldn't raise a hand to save 'em from the traps. I'm finished with the bush for good. I'm off to Wagga Town, where they won't stick a Swaggie up or take a Swaggie down. The bushmen were a decent lot, as bushmen mostly are. They filled the stranger up with beer. The hat went round the bar. The shearers threw some blankets in to make another swag. The rousers gave a billy can and brand new tucker bag. Joe Murphy gave a meerschaum pipe he hadn't smoked for years. The stranger was too full of words. His eyes were dim with tears. The ringer shouted drinks all round, and then, to top it up, the babbling brook, the shearer's cook, gave him a kelpie pup. Next day, an hour before the dawn, the stranger took the track, complete with pup and billy can, his swag upon his back, along the most forsaken roads, intent on dodging graft. He headed for the great northwest and laughed and laughed and laughed. Yeah, he had them all. Everyone in the pub, he got them all, and he got everything he wanted. The Swagless Swaggie. Well, that's a good one. It's a good, happy, funny one to end on. All right. Well, if you've enjoyed that, make sure you've given it a thumbs up and you've clicked on subscribe so you stay tuned for when next time I'm putting some more of poetry videos up. Chillin Tuesday. Yeah, next week. Okay. What's the weather going to be like here in Geaorge? Because I didn't do the weather today. And tomorrow it's going to be, I think, 15 or something, and it was 23 today. So, yeah, going from lovely to also lovely, but in a different way. All right, I'm Thundercloud. I love the weather regardless. Washing away the rainbows. Yeah, washing away the garbage, leaving behind rainbows. Goodbye, rainbows. Yeah, wash away.